Growing up, I loved playing Candyland. It was a simple game with no real tricks or strategy, but one draw of a card could send you from winning the game all the way back to Peppermint Forest. If the cards were shuffled right, the game was pretty unpredictable. My first year as a FoodCorps service member was similarly unpredictable. From pandemics to tropical storms, this year was nothing close to a traditional FoodCorps experience. But the unpredictability only shaped me into being a better service member because I learned how to continuously adapt. To highlight some of my journey, I created a board game inspired by my FoodCorps experience. This game is a nod to Candyland, but includes some twists. Here's a quick overview. Similar to Candyland, some cards have a color swatch indicating the player moved to that space. Different from Candyland, other cards are situation cards where the player reads a situation and moves their piece accordingly. Now let's see it in action. To demonstrate, I had help from a few key players from my service here. First, we have Maria, the other FoodCorps service member in New Haven. We worked closely all year from meal kit distribution to filming for our YouTube. I don't know what this year would be like if I didn't have Maria with me. Next, we have Dave, my site supervisor. Dave was always there for support and answering questions that start with, "So if this wasn't a pandemic?" Next, we have Mackie, another manager in the food service department. Mackie helped with purchasing, meal kit operations, and was always good for keeping us laughing. And finally, me, Maren, first year FoodCorps service member in New Haven. Okay, let's get started. You created a virtual tour of Massaro Farm. Move forward 3 spaces. When school started in September, the students were learning 100% virtually. In fact, the first students didn't go back into the classroom until January 19th. While most service members had some interaction with students, in New Haven, we had to adapt. During this time, we created a YouTube channel to connect with students and give teachers a chance to share our content with their classes. We started with read-alongs and cooking demos, and moved on to virtual lessons and field trips, like the one at Massaro Farm. Creating videos took a lot of trial and error, and getting students to engage was even harder.
Assemble meal kits. Go to Hill Regional.
With no kids in the building, students weren't getting their daily hot meals. So Gail, the food service director, had to adapt. She started a meal kit service where families could pick up 7 breakfasts and 7 lunches at one time. During the week, Maria and I would take phone calls from families, and on Friday we would go to Hill Regional to assist with handing out the kits. On an average week, we would hand out kits to over 250 students.
A new teacher wants to work with FoodCorps. Move forward 4 spaces.
One of the most challenging parts of the beginning of service was connecting with teachers. Without being in the building, it was tough to introduce myself and become familiar with the school. So, I adapted. I started a newsletter that was shared with teachers monthly and started creating virtual lessons that they could use on their own time. Finally, after reaching out a few times, teachers started connecting and I started in-person lessons.
COVID outbreak at one of your schools. To avoid this school, quarantine the next round.
Even when students went back to class in person, there was often whole classes being sent home to quarantine, and safety was a #1 concern. So during in-person lessons, I had to adapt. A cooking lesson turned into a cooking demo where students had to watch along. And taste tests were carted to each table in the cafeteria to avoid students interacting maskless.
Forgot ingredients for Cooking Corner Live. Go back to Central Kitchen.
Every Wednesday in New Haven, students were home and we weren't able to connect in person. So naturally, we adapted and started our YouTube cooking show, Cooking Corner Live. Every Wednesday, students watched Maria and I prepare a simple recipe live. They chatted with us and asked questions as we made snacks like fruit salad, infused water, and quesadillas. Although in the game, a situation like forgetting ingredients for a recipe or school being delayed would have set the player back a few spaces, in reality, it didn't really set me back at all. Instead of coming to a standstill when in-person learning was delayed for the second time, we just started a cooking show. There was so much I was able to do with my students, just in a slightly different way. From each hiccup, a new idea was formed. I'd like to say this year was the year of adapting. I've learned so many new skills and created new games and ideas that I hope to use next year when I return for a second year.